bit different with a panel discussion to start off the year for the Menard family, George Washington Forum, and very optimistic that it's going to go well, and potentially in the future we'll do more of these. I'm Court Rodet. I'm the director of the forum and associate professor of economics, and I'm very happy to have you guys here. I want to say thank you to a number of people, primarily the Menard family and the Phil and Pat Muck family for their financial support in making these sorts of events possible. But also lots of people here on the ground making things possible. So Amanda Knotts in the Business Service Center, the people in the Events Center, as well as transportation and helping everything go smoothly. I'm grateful for Brandon Logan of Cremedia and helping with the videography. And a special thank you to colleagues who encouraged their students to come. Julie Paxton of Economics and Young Kim from Geography emailed me and was happy to advertise on our behalf, so I'm very grateful for that. Also, a huge thank you to Ryan Flugum, professor in finance, who's working with GWF, and his contributions to tonight's event and just contributions overall are very much appreciated. I know I appreciate his leadership and creativity, and I know the students do as well, so it's a pleasure to work with him. And also a huge pleasure to work with our undergraduate fellows. I could spend hours bragging about each one of you, but I'll just say that, honestly, every day I think about how lucky I am to work with you guys, and so it is certainly a bright spot in my position here at OU. So thank you guys for all you guys do. A little bit about the George Washington Forum. If you're not aware, we are a program for civic education. We run a scholarship program, we have a reading group, and we do speaking events like these and a capstone trip at the end of the year related to the things we've been studying and so on. And for me, it's an opportunity to sort of broaden my perspective and learn from the students, and I hope they learn a few things along the way as well from me maybe. But and last but not least, I'm very thankful for the distinguished panel we have tonight and the expertise they're going to share with us. I'm just going to give a brief introduction about each one of our panelists, and don't take the brevity of the introduction as a suggestion that they are not giants in their field, because they certainly are. Their accomplishments are many, whether in the academic space or the business space or things like that. But you're here to listen to them and not to me, so that's why I'm going to be brief. First, we have Professor Maryann Feldman, who's the Watts Professor of Public Policy and Management at the Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions at Arizona State University, and Research Director at the Global Center for Technology Transfer. And I could go on and on and on. Professor Jason Jolley, OU's own, Interim Associate Vice President for Research Partnerships and Professor of Rural Economic Development and the MPA Director at the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service. And Mr. Neill Lane, entrepreneur, startup CEO, founder of the Athens, Ohio Investment Alliance, investor member of the Queen City Angels, and board chair of My Green Lab. And I could go on and on and on with all of his contributions to the local economy as well. But we're going to sort of set the scene why we are here, trying to understand and learn how universities, governing institutions, and entrepreneurs can contribute to economic progress and growth. And to set that scene, share some insights that were shared with me by Jason. And so I credit him with putting these data together. But first we'll talk about one concern that is a challenge for Southeast Ohio. And when I say Southeast Ohio, we're talking about 25 counties, right, in this economic development area. First concern are the long commutes and the workforce outmigration. So over 25% of the region's workforce commutes outside the area daily. And the region has the highest rate of super commutes, which are 90 minutes plus one way, which is quite a long way to go for work. And nearly all of Ohio's worst 30 counties in terms of extreme commutes are in Southeast Ohio. 1 in 5 workers leaves home before 6 a.m. to go to work. And then out-migration projections are quite staggering. They highlight the shortage of local job opportunities and the difficulty there is in retaining talent. The mean projected out-migration by 2050 is a decrease in the workforce of 18%. And the median projection is a decrease of 16%. So not such a rosy outlook for Southeast Ohio, and maybe we can talk about how that might change. Some other concerns: education and workforce development and labor force participation. There tends to be lower educational attainment in the area that hinders the workforce readiness and the ability to attract new industries. We've got aging population. We face poverty as an extreme issue. The region includes Ohio's 9 poorest counties, where poverty rates range from 22% to about 30% in some of these counties like Adams, Athens, Gallia, and Meigs County. There's a lower labor force participation for prime age workers 25 to 54. And if we look at opportunities for work, we look at the number of people aged 15 to 64 and the number of jobs available per person. The distressed and at-risk counties in Southeast Ohio, that ratio ranges from about 1.7 people per job to 3.9 people per job, which number of people outweighs the number of jobs available. When we look at high employment counties in Ohio, that ratio ranges from just 1.1 to 1.6. So almost 1 job per person who's looking for work. In terms of unemployment in the area, 8 of the worst 10 counties for unemployment in Ohio are in Southeast Ohio, so unemployment is also a huge challenge. We've lost, many of the counties are considered distressed or at risk, and manufacturing job loss has been significant. Another challenge we face is infrastructure. Many of these communities face difficulty in providing basic services like water and sewer. Broadband and 5G are limited, and the lack of infrastructure and investment and even the topography contribute to the challenges of attracting investment in terms of commercial and industrial development. And then lastly, before I pose a question for the panel, thinking about economic diversification, there are a number of entities that are promising to bring lots of jobs to Ohio. So if we look at Anduril, Intel, Honda, Nucor, and Form Energy, we put those together, they're saying they're going to bring about 10,000 jobs to Ohio, but none of those jobs are Southeast Ohio. So that either means people are going to have to commute or maybe leave the area or something along those lines, which is a challenge. All right, so I wanted to start our discussion talking about innovation ecosystems. And I'm here to learn as much as you are, so I'd like to find out more about innovation ecosystems, and I thought we would go to Neill first, and then Maryann, and then Jason. Ideas and innovation are key to economic growth, and creating a thriving innovation ecosystem requires ideas, talent, hard work, and much more. So how would you describe an entrepreneur, and what kind of elements are necessary for entrepreneurship to flourish, and which of those elements can we find in the area, and which of those elements are lacking? So there are many parts to that question, so you can address all or just a small part, whichever you prefer.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I should say at the outset, while my colleagues up here have expertise in economic development, I have no expertise. I know about one particular flavor, which is you come up with an idea, you take money from angels, you take money from venture capitalists. If you're lucky and you do everything right, it ends well. So I understand that very narrow little slot, and I've been very fortunate. I was part of building 2 businesses here, both of which had significant worker blue-collar components, of which I'm very pleased. And the 2 biggest, most impactful things that have happened in Athens County from my kind of entrepreneurship seat over the last 20 years are diagnostic hybrids. I don't know if any of you know about the Quiddell facility out near Post Kroger. That was a spin-off from Ohio University a number of years ago, and I think, I don't know, I'm not inside the tent, but I think there are probably 300 jobs there. And Sterling Ultra Cold, which I was a part of, is on Poston Road, and there's at least 100 jobs. Again, I'm not in the tent. So there's 400 jobs that were created out of fresh air. They weren't jobs that Honda created or that Intel created. They were the kind of jobs that entrepreneurs of that flavor created. I could go on I mean, I could say thanks and take over the whole meeting, given that question, and I'll try not to do that. What I think is missing, and what I'm working hard on with a number of people, is that entrepreneurial ecosystem, the kind that goes down that path and has what venture capitalists, angels call an exit. And what's been missing there is early stage funding and early stage coaching. It's very different being coached to build a sole proprietorship business. If you get coached to build, and they're all fantastic businesses, don't get me wrong, but if your business is ready-mix concrete trucks that go out every day, you're not going to get coached to make a business plan that'll work with angel investors and venture capitalists. So that combination of mentoring and coaching and money is what I am working on. And I think there are many fantastic things happening in this county and this region, but there are not enough investable deals. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Okay, so as the academic, I have to give you the academic definition of what an entrepreneur is. And so going back to really the 1700s, described an entrepreneur as someone who recognizes an opportunity, gathers the resources needed to realize that opportunity, and then creates value. And so when you think about it very broadly, we're all entrepreneurs, right? We're all sort of seeing opportunities. And I think of entrepreneurship more as a state of mind than an occupational category. And I like to think that everyone can be an entrepreneur. I have children and grandchildren, and they are always trying to sell me something, from lemonade to little pictures that they've drawn. And, so somehow, going through the education system, people lose that spark, that desire. And I think that that's something that we need to reignite, sort of expand the opportunity, the possibility set of what's available. And so certainly there are many obstacles to really realizing your dreams. Talk more about finance, but there's no shortage of good ideas. And I think for many years we have focused on entrepreneurs in specific technologies. Biotechnology, nanotechnology, now the hot things are the cloud and also AI. But entrepreneurs realize and create value in a whole variety of more mundane industries, and that really increase quality of life for many individuals.
Well, thank you. So I'll echo a little bit on what both Neill and Maryann said. I'll say for our students here, you may have a professor that you've deeply admired and respected and looked up to. And for me, that's Maryann. So Maryann was one of my mentors at UNC. She was not my professor, but I have learned a lot from her over the years. So I'll say I have a little imposter syndrome sitting up here with Maryann, but I'll try to work through it. So when we think about entrepreneurship in this region, I hear a lot of times folks talk about entrepreneurs and they say, well, this person's an entrepreneur. And I always ask the question, are they growth entrepreneurs where they're trying to build a business and grow? Or are they really necessity entrepreneurs where they do not have quality employment opportunities to work somewhere where they have stable income and health insurance and a retirement, and they're doing the best that they can with the things that are available to them? So when you drive through a neighborhood, some of our students may not drive through many neighborhoods here in Athens, but if you drive through some neighborhoods or think about your neighborhood back home, there's some guy driving a truck, hauling a trailer with a lawnmower on it and mows yards. Right, so that's an entrepreneur, but he probably doesn't have retirement or health insurance. Maybe he owns the company, and he does, but the folks who are out mowing and doing the work for him. So we certainly need people to do those kinds of works, and that kind of work, and they're small businesses. But I always think about it in the context here where there are a lot of people who are sole proprietors, people who are engaging in whatever gig economy that they can, and that's a real challenge because it doesn't come with some of the benefits that having more stable employment provides. And so we do want to support entrepreneurship. We do want to support entrepreneurs. But we also, I think, want to see an economy where that's balanced with more stable employment. We have a lot of stable employment here at the university and our hospital systems and our schools, but some of that's public and nonprofit. So we don't have a lot of private sector stable employment in our region. And I think that's the counterpoint, I guess, I would offer to entrepreneurship. So I'm very supportive of entrepreneurship, but I also think you need to look at the economy as a whole.
Thank you. So let's talk about the evolution of university missions. And I thought maybe we could go to Maryann and then Jason and then Neill. And thinking about universities have traditionally focused on research and teaching as their main missions. And increasingly we're hearing about this third mission of economic engagement for universities. And Neill has touched on this already, talking about the spinoffs that he was part of. So for example, many accrediting bodies now place particular focus on the impact various programs have on society and local economy. So how, in your mind, how's the role of the university evolved, and what should universities realistically be expected to deliver to their local economies and regional communities?
Thank you. And I forgot to say thank you for inviting me here. It's really been a great visit. But, this idea of what a university is changing. And in many locations, and this is the case in Athens, the largest employer is the university. And so it becomes an anchor. It provides stability and jobs and creates wealth for people in the local community. And recognizing that, we say, well, now, we live in a knowledge economy, and that to be globally competitive, we need to have new products. We need to have new efficiency that will generate wealth. We also need skilled workers, and that's probably the biggest thing that a university produces. And, our research function is really about solving problems, and then a recognition that while American universities we have been the envy of the world in the assets that we have and the products that we produce, the papers that we write. And so then sort of changing that to how do we take things out of the ivory tower, this traditional configuration, and benefit the rest of society. And so this has set up a system of technology transfer and licensing, which really began in the 80s and exists now. But universities, and you mentioned ecosystems in your first question, so entrepreneurs don't function alone. They work within communities of actors, people who support them, people who sort of help them along, and that creates a dynamic system. Universities have acknowledged that their role needs to change. So while technology transfer and licensing is very transactional, that is, you have an idea, I'm going to license that idea, I'm going to pay you to use your patent and give you royalties if I make money. Well, we've gone from that model to now recognizing that this is a much more dynamic process that involves a relationship where a company funds research. They go to the university with a problem. The university says, we think we can help you with that. And as a result, new ideas are created that benefit the company, that make the company more productive, and it subsequently hires people. So it's this sort of evolving role. Now that's relatively new, and it's something where there's been a lot of experimentation. And so universities are now changing their model and realizing that, well, ultimately we want the companies that we work with to come back with repeat transactions, and we ultimately want them to hire our students and give our students experience to continue their education and gainful employment.
So one of the things that universities do, which is critically important, that I think has been underappreciated by universities is create social mobility. And this university in particular, and one of the things that makes me particularly proud to work here, we do have a lot of first generation students. I'm a first gen college student. And the opportunities that college provides to individuals to create social mobility. Universities don't get rewarded for that, I don't believe. And increasingly, we've seen even elite public universities become what we would call, for our econ students, price makers, in which they take very, very wealthy students, often from out of state, who are fee payers. And you could make an argument that perhaps they're abandoning some of their mission to their state residents who are funding that university. So I'm from North Carolina, and I went to UNC Chapel Hill. So in North Carolina, there's some requirements that 80% of the students at the universities come from North Carolina. And when we think about what the population looks like here at Ohio University, there are a large number of Ohioans who are here. If you look at some other universities with large populations, they're bringing in out-of-state students, often fee payers. So I think that social mobility component is important. In terms of how we're beginning to look and recognize some of these things, some of the metrics are changing a little bit. I did ask the professor here, is this a closed book exam or could I bring some notes? So I couldn't remember this, so I had to bring some notes. So, Ohio University, we are an R1 institution. We were named an R1 institution, I think in 2020, 2021, several years ago, which means we have $50 million in research expenditures and 70 research doctorates. So one of the things that just came out, we were one of 21 R1 institutions and the only one in the state of Ohio to be designated as a professions-focused university. So we were recognized for not only having great research, but also having career-focused and career-ready students. And so there's some things that go into that. I don't have all the details here in front of me, but basically looking at the number of students that we take in, like Pell-eligible students, and then kind of their earnings and their success after they graduate. So I'm hopeful that some of the metrics are going to be changing in a way that begin to recognize what universities do that helps with creating social mobility. And I think that's vitally important because the public has such a low opinion of higher education. We live in a bubble here in college towns and in institutions of higher education. But if you look at some of the Gallup polling, you look at what people believe about universities, their opinions of universities, it's been in significant decline. There's a little blip where it's gone up a little bit here recently, but universities, I think if we can demonstrate that we're creating opportunities for our students, that we're contributing to social mobility, we're having students who are workforce ready, those things all will help with the images of universities, and ultimately that will help with our funding and our perceptions long term.
I probably should preface every answer with I'm the outsider and I don't know this world. These are great questions and great answers, but let me be pretty blunt, and I have a co-founder and a dear friend who's been the technology guy and the things that I've done, and he's fantastic. But let me just say some things about intellectual property. If this room, which is full of smart people, were given the patents that Apple owns, we collectively could not make an iPhone in 1,000,000 years. Building an enterprise and having intellectual property. Intellectual property is necessary, but not sufficient. And building an enterprise, and I have a founder who would be, co-founder who would be arguing with me right now, but building an enterprise is very different from inventing things. So that's a very important idea. As the kind of entrepreneurs we're talking about, and Jason, the dismissive term that VCs use as lifestyle businesses. You're building a lifestyle business, and it's not scalable, and it'll never be bought by a public company. Those businesses are very important. But if you want to build a business that'll scale, you have to build an enterprise. You don't get acquired, except in extraordinarily unusual circumstances, for your IP and your patents. Secondly, again, at the risk of being somewhat offensive, I was a professor for a very short time in my life, 2 years. I think the world of universities, the world changed and I changed. So this is not about universities, but I'm on the board of a company, and the portfolio of investments that I'm involved with, we have another couple of companies like this. They are graduate students who left the university with the project and the IP that they worked on under very favorable terms. I mean, the IP licensing office should not be a profit center at the university. It's a way to get stuff out. So they leave with a project. And that's how Stanford works, that's how Cornell works, both of which I'm pretty familiar with. University professors do not leave, in general, tenured positions to go and do a startup. They just don't do it. I mean, I looked at a business plan the other day. One of the co-founders is a professor. He's really smart, and he's keeping his job. And so our chance of investing in that went dramatically down because he's not committed to it. So a system that creates IP and graduate students who are young and can take a risk and licenses them on very favorable terms is the thing I've seen working. The thing I have seen not working is really smart professor, great idea, continue being a professor, change the minds of young people, make the world smarter. But you're not going to get an investment to build an enterprise because you've got a day job.
Oh, that's great insight. Thank you. Well, and that actually segues nicely into the next set of questions I had, talking about this technology transfer in the context of, say, Ohio University in Athens County, Southeast Ohio. How can we compete maybe with a Stanford or a Cornell that's either better funded or closer to a metropolitan area? Or I don't know, what would you say, Neill?
I think, I mean, it's very hard, and in terms of what I'm working on, which is the local angel group, I thought this was a multi-year project. This is going to take us 20 years. You know, if we're on the third fund or the fourth fund in 20 years, we'll have succeeded. I think it's creating this notion that people can go into graduate school and they can invent things, they can design things, and then they can run with them, which is a kind of profoundly different way of thinking about it. Instead of it's, oh, my graduate project, and then you never think about it again for the rest of your life. I'm in the stage in my life where I'm looking back at a basement full of old stuff, and I, very long time ago, designed human knees that were less dependent on the quality of the surgeon and joint replacement. If the surgeon's having a bad day, you do not want a joint replacement. So this was a knee that would be more tolerant of a bad carpenter, for want of a better word. I looked at it a couple of days ago when I pulled it out to throw in the trash, and I thought, I never thought of running. I mean, this is a long time ago. This is 40 years ago. I never thought of, wow, we could do a startup. But I had a friend, a lifelong friend, who recently exited a company that's orthopedic surgery and virtual reality. You cut the person open, and then the virtual reality paints dotted lines that says, drill here, cut here. I never thought of leaving with that IP. It wasn't part of the culture of that.
Were you working for a large company?
No, I was a graduate student.
Okay.
And I did my project, I handed it in, I'm going on with the rest of my life.
Jason, do you have any insight into that question?
Sure. I mean, I think some of this is setting, oh, sorry, it's got loud. I think some of this is setting some expectations, if we think about this in terms of economic development, for what tech transfer can and can't do, right? So I think the examples that Neill provided with diagnostic hybrid and Sterling ultra cold, for our young students, this is a little like we're talking about high school athletes and what they might do, and LeBron James is setting up here, right? So most high school athletes are not going to go straight to the NBA. Most of them are not going to play in college, right? So these are rare exceptions. And so Eric Muth, who's my boss, who's our vice president for research and creative activity, is here. And he gives an analogy that I stole from him, so I'll make sure I give him credit here, make sure I cite him properly, that, you know, some of the things we've had happen at the university was some of our drug development and other things, we got struck by lightning. And so part of what our job is to put out more lightning rods, right? So to create more opportunity for that to happen, for companies like Diagnostic Hybrids and Sterling Ultra Cold to happen, for some of the major drug developments and other things to happen, but to recognize that there's no guarantee. But by virtue of creating a system where we are encouraging more of that and we're building an ecosystem, there's great value in that because we are oftentimes creating smaller companies which might employ people for some period of time. We're training students, we're attracting talent, we're retaining talent, which is really important in our region. So I think thinking about it that way, and I'll go back to my early career when I worked as a practicing economic developer in North Carolina in the Chapel Hill area. And we would meet, elected officials, and they would say, if we could just do a better job of building these labs, we could get some of the great companies that are spinning out of UNC Chapel Hill. Well, there's a question as to whether there really are any great companies that were spinning out. But the ones that were going out, were going to Research Triangle Park, which is 20 miles away, because the lab rents were $5-6 cheaper per square foot. We didn't have the real estate to make it work, and so that's even a challenge here when we have some activities that are successful, and there have been some. We're very fortunate for the ones that did stay here, but there are a lot that they go elsewhere. So that's a real challenge. So I think setting some expectations for what we want to get out of tech transfer, creating a better ecosystem, thinking about what we are willing to give away or create under favorable terms with a value proposition, and let that be the thing that guides us. And to Maryann's earlier point, this idea we're just going to create license and patents, and we're going to measure that, and that's an older way perhaps of thinking about it.
Neill, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I just want to follow up on something Jason said, which is critical. The people who invest for a living, serious angels and VCs, can't pick winners.
Nobody can.
Yep. So you've got to have a portfolio approach. One of the reasons, if you're in my position, you join groups is because by putting your money together, you can invest in a portfolio. Out of 20 companies, 14 of them will fail, 2 will return the money, maybe 1 or 2 will be exceptional. So that if you're measuring success on the percent of the spin-outs that succeed, you're measuring totally the wrong thing. You've got to have a portfolio, and as an investor, I can tell you, it's viscerally uncomfortable that even though you are doing well in aggregate, the fact that most of the things you pick, you fail at is pretty sobering. And so there's got to be that kind of mindset for all the stakeholders.
Well, and even for tech transfer, and one of the strange things about innovation is that the distribution is highly skewed. And so what I mean by that is it's not a bell-shaped curve where you have the mean and the median are the same. I'm sorry, I need a blackboard, but what we have are just a few things that are big hits where we're struck by lightning and that are wildly successful. And you don't know in advance what those are going to be. I mean, evaluating research projects, I work with NSF and NIH on making research investments, and you really can't tell what's going to be a big hit. If we would know in advance, then we wouldn't have to spend money on a variety and a diversity of ideas. But we don't know really where genius is going to come from. And so it is a matter of timing and sort of the right conditions coming together. And, Louis Pasteur said, fortune favors the prepared mind, indicating you've got to be sort of looking for opportunities and available and open to what might be happening. I mean, I think for a small university, and we have Stanford envy, right? Silicon Valley. For my whole career, and when we've talked about, first of all, urban agglomerations. So these are sort of the external efficiencies that exist when you have high density. And when you have localization of industry, that is a lot of people working in the same industry, sharing ideas, sharing a labor force, co-locating. We don't have that in rural areas, in smaller cities. We need different models. And so the best way to understand Silicon Valley, there's a wonderful book by Sturgeon where he looks at the origins of Silicon Valley, which while Silicon Valley rode to prominence in the 70s and now kind of dominates popular thinking, it really started in the 1920s with government contracts and really built up over time. So this is a long time to build up an ecosystem that will be robust and that would generate, I think ultimately what we want is prosperity. Not just jobs, good paying jobs. And so, at Ohio University, where there's so much going on, I think what you have to have is tech transfer office that facilitates just a lot of relationships, puts things together. Many times people have a technology that isn't standalone, but if you can then get someone else to work on another component, you can then advance and take something to a position where a company might be able to use it. Also, where do academics get ideas? We get ideas by looking at the literature. But, it's much more exciting to be at a place and to be talking to people and to understand what their situation is and where they are. And so, I think that there is great potential. And when you think about what does this region have, well, pretty high quality of life. It's a beautiful physical environment. And you guys are all being trained. I don't know if a lot of you hopefully will stay in Ohio. But, if there aren't opportunities, you won't. And so we need to not only be what we call a science push model, let's push science out of the university, we also need to be building the demand for what we're creating, demand for our ideas and demand for the labor we train. I think right now, I grew up in the Cleveland area. And, there were a lot of industrial suppliers there. That base has completely changed. Now, as we are reshoring manufacturing, there are lots of opportunities to build out supply chains. And this region is well positioned, between close to Pittsburgh, close to Columbus, where something, could be done here that could be fruitful.
This is all great insight. And I was thinking maybe we could turn to the educational mission of Ohio University and thinking about this challenge of competing with these urban areas that have the agglomeration advantages. Should Ohio University or universities in general be crafting their curriculum to the local needs of the labor there and the talent there, or what should they be doing when they're trying to craft their curriculum?
I think that this is the expanding mission. So you have to stay true to your core competence, right? Which is training students, right? And giving them a world-class education. But I think that we need to also have more outreach to the local community. As you were saying, people are dissatisfied with universities because they see us as a monolith. They don't know how to approach the university. If you have a problem, if you have a question, I think we need to be more accessible. And this can be in the form of certificates, short courses, right? Just getting more involved with the local community, what employers need, also what civic organizations need, and just to increase the quality of life. And I think that could go a long way. We're public institutions, and so as we are large employers, we're not like for-profit companies. We have to be more expansive in what we offer and the way in which we relate to our communities. And I was always amazed when I go out and I tell people, I'm a little afraid sometimes to say I'm a university professor, right? You don't know how they might react, but it's usually very favorable, and you can get incredible conversations started, and then people do have things that they are curious about. And so, like, right now, if we could do things like trying this, teach-ins on AI, right? Nobody, who knows what AI is, but a few people do, and it should be something that we have more of a discussion about. You know, do we want to accept data centers in our community? What are the pros and cons? Let's have public debates about this. Let's build a consensus about what kind of future we would like as a society. And universities are in a unique position to be able to do that.
Jason, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think we are public universities, and so we do need to ensure we're aligned with some of the public sentiment, and make sure we're kind of mission aligned with that. And to Maryann's point, when I think about what's happening in our region, and you mentioned this in your initial remarks, we do have large employers that are on the doorsteps of Ohio Southeast, right, or Southeast Ohio. And thinking about the opportunity to train our workers, or train our students, not just to work in those places, but also they could be entrepreneurs that create things that might supply those companies. They could be part of working for suppliers that are going to be, in our region, supplying those companies. And so I don't think it's either or. I think you want to instill an entrepreneurial mindset in the students. Many years ago, I went to a conference and John Bardo spoke, who was the president of Wichita State University. He's an Ohio University alum. He got his master's degree here. And he talked about two things that really stood out during that presentation. And President Bardo's passed away now. But he said two things. One, they built a new building on campus, and they had a quad and everything looked in, and they turned the building around so it faced out, because they wanted to be community facing. So folks said, why are you doing this? The building, should look in, because that's how all the other buildings look. And he says, no, we want to be outward facing. And then the second thing he said is they wanted to infuse entrepreneurship in everything they were doing in their curriculum. And there were pushback from some of the faculty. So say folks in fine art said, well, we're doing art. We're not entrepreneurs. And it says, well, you want to sell your art, you want to get it out to market, and so you need the skills to be able to do that. So I think that these things are not mutually exclusive, but you want to build an entrepreneurial mindset in your students, you want to build curiosity. My dad worked in furniture, which is one of the staple industries in North Carolina, and one of the things that he always had constant complaints about, as did everybody else who worked in these blue-collar jobs, is, well, here come the engineers. Right, so the industrial engineers would come in and they wanted to do something with the line, and all the folks who were working on the line, they were doing real world problem solving and being entrepreneurs for how they were going to do things. And so you could think about that, and people are solving problems all the time. They're being entrepreneurial in how they look at things, and so instilling that kind of in our students. So regardless of what they're doing, they can be, we might say in the academic literature, entrepreneurs or some other kind of term, but that kind of mindset. So I think you build a mindset, but then you also build skills that translate into the workforce. The last thing I'll say is we also know that students are going to be changing jobs many, many times over their lifetime. And so, but building them skills that help them get started in their initial job, I think is really important. And that's a great way for students to stay in the region if they like, but also get a good start to increase their social mobility.
Excellent. Neill, you have some experience as a postgraduate student and as an entrepreneur. I'm curious what your insight would be into how we could change curriculum to better serve the community.
I mean, I'm certainly not qualified to talk about how you would change curriculum, but I think there's a few simple ideas. Now, simple ideas and getting them culturally embedded are very different things. But the one very simple idea about entrepreneurship is problems are opportunities. So one of our portfolio companies is a system for babies in the neonatal intensive care. The founder had a baby in neonatal intensive care. We have another company, we haven't actually got to the start line yet, but they have a platform for managing autism for families. The founder has an autistic child. And autism is not a disease, or a disease is the wrong term. Autism is not just something that the individual grapples with. It's something that a whole family grapples with for a lifetime. And there's a platform to do that. We have, I hope they do well, a company developing a new treatment for eczema. All these problems you see, I mean, the one that's been close to my heart my whole life is climate change. all these problems you see in the world are opportunities to solve those problems, and money is kind of the way you keep score. If you want to really make a difference, you've got to scale, you've got to be big. And in America, that's how we do it. You get bought by a big company, you can have a greater reach. But there's a few ideas like that, but the most profound one for me is that, I mean, climate change is the largest entrepreneurial opportunity that we've had in 500 years. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, do I get depressed about climate change? Totally. But it's a huge opportunity.
You know, sometimes I feel like such a curmudgeon because, I've been watching this, and I sort of have watched the deindustrialization of America, and I'm in economics a Schumpeterian. And so I thought, great, with global trade, we will have these dirty, noxious, routine jobs go offshore. And we will create new industries and new opportunities. And that is something that America has been about through its entire history. But we haven't been able to realize this. And I looked at this and decided it was due to private equity and venture capital. Sorry to say. And it is because the way the venture capital model works, it invests in companies that will scale and that will become big hits. And it has invested primarily in software. 90%, we're seeing more hard tech, but a lot of investment in software. And also, when venture capital invests in a company, it typically does not grow it in place. It will move it to be closer to where the location of where the venture capitalists are located. That's either going to be Silicon Valley, Boston, New York. Or if they do keep it in place, they will flip the company to realize the returns from their investment in 5 to 7 years. And so they may close it down because it hasn't met their expectations, or they may merge it with someone else. The local area that incubated that company does not benefit. So I've been very interested in alternative ways that we can finance startup companies. I've been involved in a congressionally mandated study of something called the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And so this is a way for small companies to get non-dilutive funding. And so it's up to several $1 million, and all of the large federal agencies have this program. And in our evaluation, we looked at companies that the Department of Energy, to your point about energy and environment, had invested in 2014, and sort of where are they now? And I was hoping to find some big hits, some success stories. And in fact, of this portfolio of companies, many of them were not able to scale and get investment. And disproportionately, they were bought by Korean, Japanese, and German companies. None of this investment stayed within the United States. So this was a portfolio from the Department of Energy. These were companies that had a small army of undergraduates working on this and sort of tracing these companies over time. Where did they go and what did they do? These companies were winning business plan competitions. They were doing everything absolutely right. And then they hit the wall where they could not grow, and then an acquisition. And an acquisition that goes offshore is what happened. And so I think I'm going to say, challenge you, because I think in the United States, we don't have a dearth of ideas. We have so much research, so many creative ideas going on. We have a lack of financing. So we've told entrepreneurs to go to venture capitalists, but the venture capitalists really have changed and evolved from the model that existed in Silicon Valley in the 70s and 80s and even up to the 90s, where you had cashed out entrepreneurs who would roll up their sleeves and try to build companies to people who are now just running spreadsheets and valuing assets and really not trying to create sustainable businesses for the long term. And so what we've seen over the past 40 years is a consolidation in banking, with many community banks closing. We have many banking deserts where people cannot get to do any sort of financial transactions. We say online banking. Well, online banking only works if you've got a good internet connection. Otherwise, you're precluded from that system. And also, it used to be that we had a system of, you've all seen It's a Wonderful Life, right? The Christmas movie, right? And this is an older system of called relationship banking, where I know you and I trust you and I see the opportunity you see. Well, right now, we are no more than our credit score. Okay, and so that someone will evaluate your worthiness of giving you a loan, and sort of based on, and the interest rate you're going to pay based on your prior financial history. And it's very easier for people to have financial missteps now, which then make it more and more difficult for them to realize their dreams and to invest.
Neill, would you like to
Sure.
respond?
The stuff you're talking about, I like to believe if I ever came back or had a different choice, I would have been an economist. So it's deep and close to my heart. How as a world we've become wealthier, how on average Americans have become wealthier. But averages, my father had a great line always, if you have your feet in the refrigerator and your head in the stove, on average, you're comfortable. So I couldn't agree more. The bottom quintile, maybe even the top bottom 2 quintiles, have done terribly over the last 30 years. But on average, we live longer, we're much wealthier, and it's a distribution. That's really the issue. It's not so much about the wealth creation, it's about where the wealth creation ends up happening. Yeah. So emotionally, I'm totally with you, and I've thought a lot about this. Non-dilutive capital is critical. The SBIR program is critical. NIH grants are critical. In the weeks after whatever that April day was called, Revelations or whatever, I can't even remember what it was called, but I went to a number of board meetings and it was a catastrophe because companies had lost $2, $3, $4 million of NIH funding or DOE funding. It's critical, but let me make a personal observation about taking money. When you take a grant, there's very little personal stress involved. You've got more money to do more work. When you take money from investors, the game changes. Does your life get to be more pleasant for the next few years? Probably not. But do they bring a certain amount of rigor and ruthlessness? And not ruthlessness as an unkind way. I can't say enough about the Tech Growth, who are an early investor in us, and in particular Lynn Gellerman, who's I think he's the executive director of Tech Growth. He was on our board. I mean, people who look at us now say, oh, you and Lynn are old friends. Well, yeah, we are old friends, but there was a time that he was a board member of an early stage startup that was failing. And we had a different relationship. We're now good friends. So taking that kind of money changes you. The rules are different. I also discovered the first couple of times I did this, I didn't take money from friends. I took money from friends the last time. If you want to make your life stressful, take serious money from some of your friends. And again, the outcomes, I actually think that stress, while it may not be good for your health or necessarily for your family, or all those things, it certainly makes you more driven towards a particular outcome. And then I'm just going to make one more remark. I don't have the data. I mean, I think I read the right newspapers, but I don't have the data. But if you go to 200 Angels, which is what Queen City Angels is membership is, and you ask them about why they're doing it, they're all doing it to make a difference. Now, it has to make money because that's how you have the next fund and the next fund. And then there are VCs who are making a difference, and then you go through to flavors of private equity, which are, they're ruthless. They're absolutely ruthless. So I think there's a huge spectrum. I don't disagree with your diagnosis that we innovate, we get rich on average, but the distribution is terrible.
So are you all familiar with the Gini coefficient, the Lorenz curve? And so the latest data, the U.S. has a Gini coefficient equivalent with India. Okay, the nation of India. And that is, very difficult. And what I worry about is, we have had 250 years of capacity building where we invest in science, we invest in people and their health. And if we change that system, we are going to lose our capacity to innovate and to grow. Another thing that I want to suggest that OU could do is local procurement. And so as the sort of largest institution in this area, if you would buy more of your supplies from local distributors, work with companies to sort of tailor things that you need, then you're keeping money in the local community and getting people to then maybe innovate with you. And you never know. I mean, you guys are in college. It's not like a great experience. And there are so many things that as you have a child who is in a neonatal unit and you realize, here's an improvement, I'm sure you guys could think of many things that could be innovated that could improve the quality of your lives. And so suggesting that, I'm looking for better dog poop bags, right? I mean, I just feel like this makes no sense for me to wrap this stuff in plastic and then throw it away. There's just got to be a better way to do this. And, just sort of everyday things. And if you start thinking differently about, well, what are the opportunities? What are the problems, right? So turning a problem into an opportunity and then creating something around that.
Excellent. We haven't had much of a chance to discuss kind of the third leg of the stool, so to speak, about governance. And before we go to Q&A, I thought maybe, Jason, you could start us off talking about what are good elements of good governance that could facilitate economic progress, and we can go from there.
Sure. So maybe before I do that, I'll say a little bit about what Maryann just touched on with anchor economy. So I served as an advisor to the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia on their anchor economy initiative, thinking about how we measure the impact of eds and meds, so higher education institutions and hospitals. So in Southern Ohio, which is Athens and a number of other counties, we're about 40% more reliant on anchor institution eds and meds than the national average. So a lot of that, certainly Ohio University, but also hospitals. So that's critical. So when we think about those anchor institutions, I'll just sort of underscore what Maryann said. Creating, as she said, local purchasing strategies in which you're employing local individuals, you're pushing business out in the local community, keeps more of those dollars locally. There's always a balance as a public institution, right, about trying to do the right thing with taxpayer dollars, et cetera. But when you think about ordering something from Amazon or for all of us locally, we have to use Baker Center Catering sometime, and there are local restaurants that we might want to use. I don't think Baker Center Catering's here, so don't say that. We strike that from the record. But but our ability even above a certain threshold to engage with local restaurants for ordering food and those kinds of things. So, and that's just a very simple example that anytime anyone tries to do anything in a department here, you run up against a cap, right? So, but thinking about how we can do that in terms of governance. it's a real challenge in this region because we have a lot of small communities. And you have instances where in many small communities, the mayor is a part-time person who's semi-retired or maybe retired and running the snowplow in the winter and the lawnmower in the summer. And then, even in the instance of things like with the ARPA funding, and then suddenly there's additional money. Well, how do they take that money? If they take the money, how do they complete the reporting requirements associated with that? So we have some very basic things that are challenging in this region and much of Appalachian rural America has that I don't think people fully understand. So we don't necessarily have professional governments in the way that more urban areas have. So that's a real challenge in meeting the needs of our citizens. For folks who live here locally in Athens, you can count the number of road improvement projects that we've had over the last 7 to 8 years, and the cry from business about how it's really hurting them. Now, businesses will complain about road projects no matter where you are if people can't get into their business, but the ones that we have seem to be exceptionally long, and they seem to be a lot of very limited communication, let's just say, with the business community and the local government. So, those are just kind of basic things that could be done to improve. We don't have quite the civic infrastructure that many of the more urban places have, and our economic development community. If you think about, Ohio has 88 counties, and our Jobs Ohio region, which is our state organization, Ohio Southeast represents 25 counties in our region. So, it's a tremendous geographic swath of the state that they're trying to cover. And there are vast economic differences, vast, governing differences across that geography. So it is a real challenge. We need better and smarter young people in government. And if I'm a young person, like I have, teenage daughters, it's really tough to look at them and say, I think you ought to get a government job, right, in the current climate. But thinking about those innovations, creating public-private partnerships to address some of our problems, but I don't have great suggestions for you other than to say that we are certainly under-resourced in our area, and rural places are behind, and it seems like that we're getting further behind.
Maryann, did you have some thoughts on that?
Just an interesting observation. So I was looking at the signers of the Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence, excuse me, and 15% were scientists or physicians. Okay, Ben Franklin, right? And then if you think about other people, George Washington was a surveyor. Well, now we would call that a civil engineer. And so that was sort of the sort of composition of people who were involved in signing the Declaration of Independence. Well, right now in Congress, there's one physician and one physicist, and everyone else is a lawyer. And there was just a really interesting article in the Atlantic Monthly which said that in China, their upper echelons of government are dominated by engineers. And they sort of have a different understanding. They're looking for different kinds of solutions. In the U.S., we have lawyers, and they look at things differently. And I think that, campaign finance, the whole sort of structure of what's going on in Congress is so dysfunctional now. But I think I've written an article for more involvement of engineers in politics, and I think many of you have introduced yourselves as philosophy majors. Oh my God, that is just music to my ears. To think that people would have different perspectives and more holistic perspectives. And we as economists, and I think Applebaum has written a book about the sort of swine song of the economists and the way that economic thinking has distorted a lot of incentives, where we focus more on efficiency as an outcome. We focus more on the things that we can easily count and maybe not on the things that are most important.
Neill, I'll let you respond, then I'm going to jump out into the audience and let them ask me questions.
I have two quick governance points. the one to just stress what I said earlier, and I'm a perfect example of neoliberalism, so I get it. We lifted 1 billion people in China out of poverty, and the bottom quintile, maybe the bottom 2 quintiles in the US, got poorer while we all got richer in America. If you believe that a unit of good is a unit of good wherever you do it in the world, which I happen to believe, lifting 1 billion people out of poverty is profound. And the fact that we left people behind here is not solved by fighting globalization. It's solved politically. I don't know what the solution is, particularly right now, but it's really important to understand that the profound, if you really care about humanity, the profound success of globalization and lifting huge swaths of the world out of poverty. But we messed up how those benefits accrue to Americans. So that'll be my macro neoliberal comment. Then I have a very concrete one, which is making me crazy on the roads in Athens. I have spent a lot of time in Japan, more than 50 times in Japan. And one of the things I've done around is walk around early in the morning, like 3 o'clock, because I can't sleep because I've got jet lag. If the contracts for the earthworks we have in Athens were structured as the Japanese way the contracts are structured, you work from 7 in the evening till 5 in the morning under spotlights, and every month you finish this project early, every month early you finish, we'll pay you $1 million, and if you finish it 4 months early, we'll pay you $6 million. We would have a completely different set of roadworks in Athens. I am overdue to have this conversation with our mayor, but this is a cultural what you expect, and what we expect is people looking at phones, holding up, stop, and go carefully. We just have no expectation of what the delivery of great services, construction services are. And it's a cultural problem, and it's a governance problem, because we don't even know to ask that they work at night, and we don't even think to pay them a bonus for finishing early. I'll stop there.
Maryann, you look like you wanted to respond. And then
No.
whoever has a question, raise your hand, I'll bring you the microphone.
I want to say also with governance, and it comes back to entrepreneurship. And, you know, in interviewing people, like, why didn't they start a company? And many times, well, you know, I've got a stable job and I've got health insurance, and I would lose those benefits. And so when we think about what is it that we want as a society, what are the things that would make our lives easier and more productive? I mean, this is where we should be having conversations and then getting, governance is really just about collective action. Right? And so then, you know, what kind of future do we want and envision?
Hi, my name is Mai, and I'm a freshman at our university, majoring in business analytics and entrepreneurships. I currently join the Appalachia Emerging Investment Fund program, and it gives me a really general background about both VC and also entrepreneurships. So I'm interested in how founders and the one own the ideas as an entrepreneurs, they can maximize their potentials, their leaderships, not only for the entrepreneurs, but also when I work in an enterprise, and how can I maximize my potential in my work. Yeah, and also thank you so much for coming here and talk about really cool about local economy. Yeah.
I think, first of all, through the people who've organized this and through court, you can get my contact details. So I would totally spend some time with you about, you know, what you need to have an investable plan. I think finding some idea to run with is really important. And I think the classes you do I think it's great. I think the world of academics and universities, but there's a kind of get real part to it. And I'm more than happy to, like, as I said, spend some time coaching you to the start line on whatever your business idea would be. And I will be a bit different, perhaps, from what you've been exposed to up to now.
Maryann or Jason, have any thoughts?
I want to say, I think talking to people and enlisting mentors, and I think also like a good way to approach talking to people, and I'm just going to say that many times when we talk to people, we talk, but really when you talk to people, you want to listen, right? And just see what you might learn from them and how this might advise you. And I think it's a matter of sort of increasing your circle and getting people to sort of invest in your idea and generate excitement. We all like being part of something, right? And so when we see that something is gaining momentum, then it becomes exciting. And then that becomes your ecosystem.
Yeah, I would just add, I was telling someone the other day, I was the smartest that I've ever been when I was like 17 years old, right? 17 or 18. And then the older I get, the less confident I become because I realize how little I know about the world. So I think keeping an open mind about, your ideas and the ideas of others, and being willing to engage. I had a colleague once who did a program at MIT, he did a program at Harvard. He was an MIT grad, and he talked about the saber rattling, the intellectual saber rattling that occurs. And so I think some of that ability to have dialogue with people who have different thoughts and beliefs than you, who challenge your beliefs, and there's a little saber rattling, but doing it in a constructive way, I think we've lost some of that and the ability to do that. And so kind of engaging with others and having them challenge your ideas and you challenge them in a polite and constructive way will help sharpen your ideas and your ability to communicate. And then if you're open-minded about it, you may learn some things about yourself and learn about new opportunities.
Hello. Okay, good. I'm Natalie. I am a Voinovich Scholar. I'm a senior this year. Last year, the team that I worked with was the Mayor's Partnership for Progress, which unites mayors and village administrators across the Appalachian counties of Ohio, provides resources, does research, helps with grant applications. And currently, I'm working with Sunday Creek Horizons, which is a firm that also works with Appalachian businesses and nonprofits in terms of those same kind of things. I was kind of wondering throughout this conversation, in terms of capacity building and what different larger organizations or better funded groups can do to support the region, at what point, or do you think there is a point where that support can be pulled back? How do you think that can be measured and determined? Because as incredible as the work that I had done with them and am doing now with Sunday Creek is, I kind of think, having support people and some undergrad who's doing stuff obviously might not be the end goal for some of these entities and organizations. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on, how much of that support structure remains and how much of it over time would maybe be removed once people are empowered and more capable of doing those things on their own.
So one challenge in this region is we don't have many great regional support organizations like you have in other areas. So, we do have some folks who are councils of government in various areas, but we don't have quite the density of expertise. So it is a real challenge. Certainly, you would like to build the expertise with the professional staff, and the challenge with the mayors that you're talking about working with is they don't have professional staff in many cases, right? Maybe there's an engineer, but there's not often a city manager in many of the small places or town manager. So I think in my mind it's important to build capacity in the core areas, so finance, budgeting, making sure they have some understanding of their ability to manage their finances, and then thinking about what are the assets that could be better addressed collectively rather than individually, because there are some things where many small towns, those should be addressed in that way. I have a very unpopular opinion about some things, which is school systems. So growing up in the South, when you go into many rural places, there are not a whole ton of school districts. And the reason for that, of course, is because of segregation. So schools were forced to desegregate, and school systems were combined. If you look at Athens County, for as small as it is, we have 5 school districts. And so then that means, well, there's 5 superintendents, and there's probably 5 associate superintendents, and then there's an array of other people who work in administrative offices. And so when you think about those things, I know this wasn't exactly your question, someone said to me, like, that's political suicide to ever think about getting rid of these school districts, because this is the employment base for many of these rural communities, and if it weren't for those jobs, there wouldn't be anything else. But if you think about it from kind of an administrative perspective, you could probably invest more in education and teachers if you had some more centralized administrative functions, and you could focus on what's important, which is building up, our students. And so when you think about that perspective with local governments, like mayors, sharing services, consolidation of services, shared policing and fire and other kinds of things, but that takes trust among communities and trust among citizens. And then it takes somebody who would have the vision to be able to come in and say, legitimately, these are the things that we could consolidate together. We could have shared services, and we could save money. So if you were able to do those things, you may not have to hold someone's hand as long as possible, but as long as you've been doing it. But it is a real challenge, because you're serving a vital function for many of these communities. And then when you go, maybe there'll be a student behind you, or maybe not.
Can I just pick up on something Jason said? I may have given the impression that we should change how we're doing things. I don't think we should redeploy anything. There's never enough philanthropy. There's never enough help. But we need to keep doing all of those things, and we need to do more things in different areas. So just to be clear. I was on the Business Advisory Council for the school board for a number of years, and they have a career day. And I worked to have a kind of entrepreneurship theme. So there was entrepreneurship, the plumbing business, entrepreneurship, the general contractor business, entrepreneurship, Neill. And the resistance I got from the school and the teachers organizing, not resistance as a matter of ideology or as principle, they just never thought of the world in those terms. And having entrepreneurship be a theme, now I'm no longer involved with the school, I don't know if it continued, but having entrepreneurship be a theme and the primary heading, and the subheading is general contractor on a house. But having entrepreneurship be a theme in Career Day, I was immensely proud that we got it there, but it was an unbelievable battle because people didn't know. They didn't think about the world like that.
Yes, I have a question. I serve on the governor's economic roundtable for the state of Ohio, and one of the issues that I see for the state of Ohio is kind of a single-mindedness in its advocacy of supporting, getting Intel to come to Ohio. And so there's so much, we're putting all of our eggs in one basket, and everything, including, since a public university is getting state funding, everything is swirling around to how can we get some of that Intel money? And so you'll see certain buzzwords, additive manufacturing, advanced automation, AI, all of these buzzwords to support very specific industries. And I just wonder, thinking about southeastern Ohio in a rural community, the bread and butter of economic development for our community is going to be small business. And I feel like we're overlooking an opportunity to help rural Ohio grow by focusing so much on this, kind of putting all the eggs in one basket. And I was just curious, from your perspective,
what do you think would be the most helpful things to support small businesses in rural communities?
I think it's a really good question. And so, states like to announce that we just got this huge investment from Intel or, Taiwan Semiconductor. It's going to generate all this activity. And yet, we ignore, we spend, I'm going to say, a lot of time talking about entrepreneurship, but it's much easier to take an existing enterprise and let it scale or grow or stabilize than to start a small business. I mean, your idea of looking at contractors are, I had an electrician who did free work for me because I said, your invoicing system is terrible. You didn't give me an invoice for 2 months, and here's what you should do. And he said, okay, forget the bill. Like, this was really valuable. And I mean, that's just like a teeny bit of advice. And so, I'm going to say, give up your Amazon Prime membership. It's one thing you can do, and shop locally. And so Amazon, I mean, they just had a settlement, right, because they were had involved the Prime service, and I don't remember the details right now, but Amazon at one point used to be very price competitive. Not anymore, because people aren't shopping around and comparing prices. So their prices on average are higher, plus there's all the environmental impacts. And, it's just very different if you go to a local store and maybe they don't have what they need, but maybe that shopkeeper has never thought that they ought to stock something. And so you can have that, again, a relationship-based economy where people can change. And then the idea of just, sort of making more investments. I think we need more vehicles for people to be able to invest in their local communities. Angel investors tend to be wealthy individuals, but, I've talked with a lot of people who are retired who have their life savings in the stock market. And they say, I would much rather invest in a company that I could watch and, and go to every day to get my coffee, and let's see how they do. And, so I feel like we need to sort of change this paradigm and pay more attention. There's just such great potential.
So when I worked at UNC Chapel Hill, we evaluated the effectiveness of economic development incentives for the North Carolina legislature. And Maryann didn't work on that project, but we interacted a lot during that time. So I didn't have a lot of friends, but one of the real challenges is these big announcements crowd out ideas, right? They don't just crowd out, capital and these other kinds of things. And so I was at a conference, I guess it was last year, and some folks were talking about going after a large semiconductor play. And I asked the question, well, what did this crowd out that you decided not to do because you were all devoted to this effort? What did you not do? Well, they looked at me like I was crazy. And these were academics, right? And so they didn't have an answer for what they didn't do, but clearly they didn't do something, right? So I think in my mind, focusing on creating skills that allow people to engage in working for suppliers and various manufacturing entities so that there is at least some flexibility. So if one of these does hit, whether it be Intel or Anduril or Honda LG or some of the other things, at least there is some flexibility, for our students and for others who are getting retrained. I think we're missing an opportunity to think about how do we engage in incumbent workforce training. So people there's 600 people going to lose their job in Chillicothe that worked at the paper mill. They're not traditional students like the folks sitting in front of us today, but there are citizens of this region not far from our branch campus at OUC who need to be reemployed, and thinking about how do we retrain them. I do think strengthening our local purchasing arrangements that Maryann mentioned earlier is another way that we can help small businesses. And then, if there's anything we could do to help them with coming together to increase their buying power, There are some models out there. I'm not an expert on how this is done, coming together to help them do things like, health insurance collaborative, so they can try to purchase health insurance together as a group. I know some chambers of commerce, for example, have looked at that. I don't have a great model to suggest, but when you think about the things that create the things that hurt people and keep them from being entrepreneurs, right? Health insurance, retirement, these other kinds of things. It's hard to do that when you're in a mom and pop shop. But if we can have people come together and, kind of use their collective power to buy at group rates. Those are kinds of things in which, is there a good model for that? Well, I know people have tried this, but I don't really know. But we have a lot of really bright students, right? So that could even be a project where somebody looks at that and says, hey, could we buy group insurance through the Athens Chamber of Commerce in some way? What would that look like? Or could all the chambers of commerce come together collectively and we link them in the 25 county region and go out and try to come up and buy health insurance or create a retirement plan?
And all that does is to put these small businesses on parity with larger employers.
So that's a great student project for some of you all.
Yeah, the honest answer from me for your question is I don't know. It's a very hard question what you do. I should make this point. I was able to do what I've been able to do in my life is because my wife was a long-time employee of a high university. So when I came home and said I'm not going to earn any money for a few months, or that was where our healthcare came from. It would have been a much bigger bet, particularly when we had younger children. I don't know how we would have done the bet, but it would have been much harder. And then just maybe to some of the things that Maryann's been talking about, for me, there's certain important things in life, like how you give money away and how you build enterprises, but how you spend your money. We have one of the best farmers markets in the country. If you don't buy at the farmers market, in my mind, that's a failure. Buying stuff at Kroger's is terrible when you can buy it at the farmers market. The guys who've been helping us on a multi-year project with managing our little bit of forest, I'm coaching them to start a business. The general contractor for our house, I'm coaching. Will they ever get there? I don't know. But, it's probably come through from what I said. I don't know how you, in a macro level, solve these problems. But I'm a huge believer in just try and start an angel group, try and coach people, try and, go to the farmer's market. When I go to the farmer's market and everything's priced at $5 from a vendor, my response is, that's so fantastic because the math's easy. That's not what most people say. How can everything cost $5? Shouldn't the broccoli be $3? Again, I'll stop myself there.
My name is Yashvita. I'm a linguistics and a religious studies student here. I'm really curious, thinking about that story you had about the school system and their career fair day. How would you guys answer the question of inspiring young people to think about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial culture and think about innovation as like a career pathway, both at the university level and for younger students might be in K through 12 education?
Again, it's a very difficult question. I think, and I'm not, this is again not me concluding from the data, I think if you go to the 3 high schools that are around Stanford, everybody, or the 3 high schools, the 3 elementary schools, everybody would understand building a bigger enterprise because their parents have done it, or their uncle's done it, or their neighbor's done it. We have no cultural history of doing that. Our entrepreneurs, of which there are many, are they are lifestyle businesses. I think in my mind, it's just this multi-decade project of we have a few successes. There are people I had on the team, one in particular was very grouchy, and then when we got to the finish line and were acquired, he said to me, if you want to do this again, I'd really like to be part of the team. So, when you succeed, you create a little ecosystem of people. But I don't know the answer to your question other than kind of incrementally, one step at a time. And, my co-speakers are much better qualified to discuss the kind of macro things that you do.
we eschew these lifestyle businesses, but they are a demonstration effect, right? And so that if you can see someone's making a little bit more money, right? In studying tech transfer, when I was at Johns Hopkins and interviewing people, and why were they involved in tech transfer? Why weren't they involved in tech transfer? I had one scientist explain to me that he was driving to work and he parked his car and he saw someone in another department drive in with a Porsche. And he said, how did that guy get a Porsche? I'm smarter than he is. And he talked to the guy and found out that the guy had licensed some technology and had revenue coming in. And then he said, I'm going to do that. And, we have written about this, calling it the Porsche effect. I mean, people are competitive and we look for examples. And for many times, people have never thought that they might start their own business. But once you observe this and once you get a little bit of wealth, you can then invest and sort of move up. And so it's a process, and it does take a long time.
I might just add one point, because there was something that got traction that I think some of the school kids understood. When you build a lifestyle business, the only exit is you retire and your kids take it over. And people talk with some pride in the kind of community we're in about, well, their father built a business. The business your parents built are handcuffs. They don't allow you to fulfill the life that you wanted to build. And I've seen this. I know people who've built very big businesses where they go to work in their 70s and their kids all work there, and the kids' dad's there telling them what they're doing wrong. They would all be much happier with a multi-million-dollar trust fund. The notion that family businesses are a trap and are handcuffs, there were a few kids in the room who were like, I'd never thought of it like that. And it did get traction.
Again, I guess a counterfactual, which is that some people, sort of what are you going to do and what's your career going to be, and having the sort of availability to work in the family business, especially when you've come up in that business. I'm a little bit bitter because my family did have a business and none of the girls were offered the opportunity to take it over. What I've observed, do you know Pella Windows? They're a window manufacturer and they are in, I believe, Iowa. But it is a multi-generational business, and they recognize, it was started by the grandfather who recognized with this agricultural community that they needed to do something else to sustain their population. And so during the Depression, he started this window business, and they have gone through successive generations where they feel like they have such high quality of life in this small town, and they employ their neighbors, and that they sort of love this. So this is an alternative model. And, what we see is that a lot of companies, people, it used to be in the United States that the smartest person in Nebraska went to the University of Nebraska and they built their life in Nebraska. Well, right now, the smartest person in Nebraska wants to go to MIT or Stanford. And then they will go to Wall Street, most likely. They're not going to return to Nebraska to help that local economy. And I think we need to rethink this. Like, what does it mean to have a good life? Is it all about just the money that you earn? Or would you feel better if you knew that you were employing 25 people and that was 25 families, and they had children and their children would be able to go on to college? I mean, the intrinsic reward, but we have just become very materialistic. And so, we see that, and there's a wonderful book by Alexander, which is called Glass House, which looks at the city of Lancaster, Ohio, which we passed by yesterday as I came from the Columbus airport. And it was Anchor Hocking. So you guys are here on the Hocking River. And it was a factory town. And that's how a lot of production was organized at one time. And we have this sort of geographic clustering of innovative activity, highly, highly specialized. And in Ohio, it was glass, it was pottery. Before it was steel. None of those things exist anymore. And they could. Just say that. But, Alexander is from Lancaster, Ohio, and he talks about how the company, the family sort of looked after, and then, they wanted to scale, they wanted to diversify, they wanted to move production offshore, and Lancaster really suffered. And within management, we talk about shareholder value, which is that firms, corporations exist to provide returns to their shareholders, versus a more encompassing view, which is called stakeholder value. And stakeholder value means that as you're operating as a public company, you have these rights, but you also have responsibilities. You have responsibilities to your workers to provide a safe workplace, to pay them a fair wage. You have responsibilities to your suppliers, not to sort of try to bleed them dry and cut costs and have a sort of spiral to the bottom. And you have a responsibility to the place where you are located, the place that nurtured you, the place that gave you advantages, that gave you, sort of roads to make your business profitable and those things. And so, we've really changed our view, and we don't hold corporations accountable. We offer them incentives to come. There's a sort of great podcast that looks at Kansas City, Missouri versus Kansas City, Kansas, and they compete. And sometimes this competition for incentives is strongest at the local level. And companies ping pong back and forth because they will get a little bit of money from the jurisdiction for 5 years. You have to stay here 5 years or we'll claw back those incentives. They stay for 5 years and then they renegotiate. And it's a game and it's a race to the bottom. But unfortunately, that's the way that a lot of businesses are sort of viewing what they're doing. And I think alternative models of ownership, like co-ops or employee stock ownership plans, there are other ways that we can organize production beyond corporations. We see right now a lot of publicly traded companies are going private because they don't want the pressures that are imposed on them by the stock market. Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Well, we could go on and learn much more from our experts. Thank you so much for your time and generosity. Thank you for the questions and your attention. Let's give a warm OU thank you to our expert panel.